Well, hello. So here we are, exactly halfway through the course, and that happened pretty quickly. So I hope you're enjoying it so far. Everything seems to be going pretty well. You're writing good work, and the blog is working, and the communication seems open. So we're halfway through. Stay engaged, keep writing good work, and everything will be fine. So we've talked a little bit about psychoanalysis and how the unconscious workings of the mind may manifest themselves in ways that are perhaps mysterious or less than obvious, opaque to scrutiny sometimes, and what that can mean for us as literary critics when we apply these ideas to narrative or to cultural artifacts. Now we're going to step out of the individual and move into a more collective social realm, and we're going to look at the relationship of authority and economic systems to the people who live within them, and the way in which systems of economic exchange affect culture and affect the sort of development of the individual or the subject within culture. So key to this, we'll be looking at Marxist criticism and thinkers whose work owes a great deal to Marxism, and indeed the structuralists to a certain extent owed a certain amount to Marxism, because Marx was very interested in moving the critique away from individual relationships and looking at a kind of macroeconomic picture, and how the economic relationships within whole sort of nations and geographical regions affected the people who live within them. So now key to this is the idea that, for example, our economic system determines the kind of culture we can have. So, for example, in the USA in the 21st century, we live in a capitalist society. And capitalism, of course, believes that in a certain economics of akin to the survival of the fittest in some way, which is to say that everybody is an individual, everybody is responsible for their own welfare and well-being, and what you earn and what you accrue in material terms throughout the course of your life should be based on the fruits of your labor. So the way you apply your talents and the diligence that you apply your talents and the amount of hard work you put in should equal your rewards at the end. Okay, that's how kind of a pure sort of virtuously pure capitalist system should work, in as much as what you've got at the end of the day is what you deserve in terms of your wealth equals your talents plus your effort, or something like that. Now, of course, we know that's not true, because there is inbuilt inequality in the system, and that inequality has many different formats. So, for example, if somebody really is a self-made man or woman, who really has risen from nothing, selling lemonade on the street corner at the age of 9, and then growing to become the CEO and owner of a multinational corporation, then good for them. They're entrepreneurial, they're hardworking, they're diligent, inventive, creative, all the rest of it, talented people who no doubt deserve everything they have. However, while those stories may be a kind of foundational myth of American society and American economics and really the American dream, those examples of self-made individuals are somewhat few and far between, because we know that in reality privilege is built into your background, right? So if you have educated and wealthy middle-class parents, then you're much more likely to go to college, you're more likely to avoid teenage pregnancy, you're more likely to avoid incarceration, you're more likely to be able to have literacy skills by 3rd grade that will already predict how you're going to end up, your chances of finishing college and getting a job by the time you graduate high school, or even if you will graduate high school. So there are all kinds of inequality built into the system. We don't all start from the same place, and while the political conversation in this country would like to perhaps de-emphasize some of that and say it's all down to you, you should all pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I think there's plenty of very reasonable and sort of non-extreme arguments that would say, in fact, we have privilege, inherited privilege and accrued privilege that's built into our lives when we already begin. And that's part of criticism. Remember, right in the very first week, we were talking about ways in which we can think about where we come from and where we start. What our context is, and our privilege is part of that, and that kind of baggage of privilege that we bring with us. However rich and varied that is, or however meager, if indeed we do come from very humble background, truly humble backgrounds, then that also informs where we come from. Now, in Marxist criticism, the question is really, to what extent can we distance ourselves from economic relationships? Because everything we do, really, the roof above our head, the clothes on our back, the food that we eat, exists in a network of economic exchange. There's no stepping outside of that. So just as Derrida, with his vexatious and teasing comment that there is no outside the text, suggests that everything it's impossible to stand outside of language and objectively look back in. For Marxists, the question is, what is our relationship to economics, to the economic base and the economic system within which we dwell, right? Can we just say there is economic exchange and, I can immunize myself to it? It's just that sometimes I go to the store and I hand over $10 and I take home some groceries and it's that. I keep it at a distance. Or is it much more insidious than that? And have I in fact internalized some aspects of the system within which I grew up and which I've been acculturated, to the extent that actually by living within capitalism has come to inform me and kind of structure the way I think, and has kind of allowed human relations to be kind of thought of in many similar ways to economic relationships, right? So now this would be the same for culture. Does our culture in Marxism, so the art that we create or the novels that we write, do these naturally kind of reflect the economic system within which we operate, or can they stand outside of them and critique it, right? So think about some of the communist countries. Also, here's a little test for you. If anyone can leave in a comment the names of all the communist countries currently existing on the planet, and there are 6 of them, I think. Let me just think. 5 of them. I think there's 5 of them. Is that right? I think that's right. Yes, I think that's right. If you can think of all the communist countries that currently exist on the planet, and you can leave it in a comment, and you can promise me that you didn't look it up on the internet, then I don't know. Good for you. Right, anyway, so moving on, what was I saying? Yeah, so, okay, so now in countries that have had communist revolutions at some point in their history, in the 20th century usually, this has been one of the principal philosophical and intellectual questions that they have struggled with, the ideological nature, right? Is it enough just to change the government and to impose a different economic system? Or do you have to have a revolution of culture too? Do you have to make people think differently? So have they internalized capitalism to the extent that you basically need to wipe their brains clean and start again? And if you think about things that happened in, say, Cambodia under Pol Pot, or with the Great Leap Forward under Mao Zedong in China, this led to enormous upheaval and profound bloodshed and unhappiness and real grief. And so you can see that this is a very serious question, and one that has enormous implications. Now, I don't want you just to conflate Marxism and communism. They're 2 different things, okay? Communism is a system of government informed by Marxism, but I think that anybody who has a sort of subtle understanding of Marxism, of Marxist thinking, and an appreciation for that kind of thought would tell you straight away there's been no Marxist state, no kind of manifestation of Marxism that one would consider kind of true to the spirit of Marxist thinking. no manifestation on earth, because Marxism is not about demagoguery and tyranny, but communism very clearly, through Stalin and the like, has very clearly manifested itself in very kind of oppressive and tyrannical ways. Anyway, I'm going off topic a little bit, but today I want you to think about, to read about Marxism and think about that a little bit, and also think really through these ideas of the way in which an economic system is tied to authority and government, right, and the way that authority imposes itself upon the subject, and the way in which, if at all, the subject can get out from under that authority, or if we're always implicated in a relationship with it, so that we can never really truly be dissidents, we can never really truly be transgressive. All we can really do is kind of try and appropriate or clear a space for ourselves within which we might be autonomous. And also, by the same token, I want you to think about the effect of capitalism, or the ways in which capitalist systems and standards of exchange may manifest themselves in cultural artifacts, be they novels or artworks or movies. Okay, I mean, Hollywood clearly is not only runs on a kind of profit motive, which is obviously purely capitalistic, but also many of the kind of movies we would see in the Cineplex, your summer blockbusters, your superhero movies, indeed most kind of movies of that come out of the big studios. Think, in what way is the hegemonic, that means the kind of dominant ideology of American capitalism, speaking through these movies in the way, think for example in the way that they prioritize the individual and individual heroism, and they never really think about sort of collective solutions to things. They're always individuals, and they're always somebody, through their own industry and hard work, coming to some kind of attaining some kind of reward through having endured through hardship and adversity, right? Now, that in itself may be a perfectly innocuous narrative, and one that's very familiar from fairy tales onwards. However, how does that perhaps serve some of the interests of a dominant capitalist ideology, that it's in the interests of corporations and investment bankers and hedge fund managers to perpetuate, right? It's this kind of lottery mentality. It's this lottery mentality that any minute, any one of us could get the big reward, right? And that prevents us from perhaps thinking we should come together communally in order to change things for the common good. Rather, we have this rather sort of individualistic and somewhat solipsistic belief that maybe one day we have a puncher's chance of raking in $1 million. You never know. So anyway, think about all these things. There's a lot to think about, a lot to talk about. So do the reading, send me emails, write your comments, keep the blog looking pretty, and I'll be catching up with you soon. Okay, so power to the people.